Colin Reed is a former executive director of American Rising. He's now with Definers. And John Summers was communications director for former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. It's good to have you both here. So we're already talking about 2020, and it's a good, I mean, there's plenty of material. I did want to talk about this today because President Trump talking about, his support from women, and no doubt, Colin, within his base, the women that are supportive of him are stalwart supporters. But the Fox News voter analysis from the 2018 midterm, if you look at that, women, especially suburban women, they went with the Democrat 56 to 39. So do the Republicans have some work to do here?
Well, I think there's no doubt that President Trump has challenges with suburban voters right now and women voters right now. But unlike the midterm elections, the path to the presidency in 2020 is going to go through rural states. It's going to go through states like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. And there was another story out today, Dana, about how the GOP infrastructure is unifying around President Trump. And the RNC and the Trump campaign are working glove in hand to reelect him. And on the other side, it couldn't be any different. The DNC is in complete shambles. They're broke. They're fighting amongst themselves about email lists. And, that's at the end of the day, the presidential election isn't determined by infrastructure, but in really close races like 2020 is going to be, it can make a difference in those close races that are decided by 11,000 votes or 50,000 votes or whatever it might be in places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, et cetera, et cetera.
John, I'm smiling a little bit because as Colin describes Republicans as being, orderly and in lockstep and everything's great, that wasn't necessarily the case in 2016, but they did all consolidate behind President Trump. And the Democrats kind of love being this ragtag group where it maybe is a little bit more chaotic. What do you think about the Republicans' messaging and the weakness of it going into 2016? Where do you think the Democrats have an edge?
Well, as we talk about President Trump and what the Republicans are trying to do, what we're really talking about is rebranding. But at the end of the day, I mean, you can dress the Grinch up like Santa Claus, but at the end of the day, he's still the Grinch, right? You're not going to change Donald Trump. Donald Trump created his brand. He's the only person who's really going to be able to manage his brand. And if he wants to change it, then he's got to do it by changing the policies that he embraces, like taking health care away from millions of hardworking American people while at the same time undermining Medicare and Social Security.
Well, I'm sure he'll have something for that. But the other thing I wanted to bring up with you is that there's a message to suburban women, but there's also a message to blue-collar voters who voted for President Trump in 2016 and put him over the top. And Colin, let me read to you from this New York Times piece yesterday. Let's go with the Wall Street Journal first here. We have it up. Dante Cheney saying that compounding the problem for Republicans may be a slowing automobile industry across the industrial Midwest. A series of middle-income counties saw a notable blue shift in their vote this year as Democrats won statewide offices in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania as well. For partisans on both sides, the results are evidence that the blue-collar voters are very much back in play for 2020. I won't read the whole thing from David Leonhardt, but basically he's saying that an economic populist message is the one that would be the winner for Democrats, and he's really focused on voters who voted for Barack Obama in 2012, Donald Trump in 2016, and then Democratic House candidates in 2018. And so are those the real swing voters? So like when you're thinking of messaging, Colin, I know you know a lot about this, do you try to focus on the suburban women or do you try to focus on those blue-collar voters?
Well, you try and figure out your best path to 270 electoral votes, but the big difference between a midterm election and a presidential election is a choice between two candidates. And President Trump, by the end of this general election campaign, will have so eviscerated whoever his Democratic opponent is that the voters will be left to choose between two very different visions. And by the way, the Democrats are going to spend the next 18 months arguing about who supports a carbon tax more, about who wants to abolish ICE more, about who wants to impeach the president more, in a bloody, nasty primary that's going to make our 2016 Republican primary look like a walk in the park. And none of those messages, by the way, are very receptive to blue-collar voters or folks in the heartland.
How would you respond to that, John?
Well, actually, you saw what our message has been, and it worked in 2016 at a historic level. If I was the Republicans, I would be spending some time not only looking at how they need to win the presidential, but also spending some time licking their wounds and then coming up with some sort of plan to reclaim some of the seats they lost.
Let me ask you about the Senate seats. So obviously the Democrats did very well in the House. No one should take anything away from them on that. But on the Senate side, the Republicans did quite well. So when Colin makes the point that it's really the path to 270 that you have to worry about, will the messaging that worked for some of these suburban House districts actually carry you through to a presidential win?
Well, I see what you're talking about, but the difference is the way the map was set up, and there were a lot more Democratic seats that were up than Republican seats. So the Republicans went into this definitely with an advantage, but we saw over and over again in 2016, throughout the whole cycle actually, that the main issues people were concerned about were health care, tax cuts for the middle class, and those are things that you'll see us talking about coming up in 2020. I think that's the part where, voters in the Midwest are disappointed because, they're typically voters who come along with Democrats because they know we've got their backs. Donald Trump gave them something new to take a look at. He had a good message for them.
He's the disruptor.
So they decided they'd give it a shot, and I think now they're seeing that they've been sold a false bill of goods.
Well, we'll see what happens. Of course, that's my favorite show, President Trump's show. We'll see what happens, as he says. Loved having you. Colin Reed and John Summers, thank you.